Monopoly. To win at Monopoly, you must hoard cash, build properties, and force your opponents to go bankrupt. The clearest path to success is to buy property, get a monopoly of that colour group, and then add properties with houses and hotels, which allows you to charge rent when your opponent lands on them. There is actually a Monopoly movie coming out starring Margot Robbie. The game is now owned by toy manufacturer Hasbro, and they obviously did pretty well out of the Barbie movie, Barbie being one of their toys. You know, what the hell is even going to happen in that? Like, what's the plot? What's the plot twist? The mind boggles. Boggle is also owned by Hasbro. So I'm surprised that Hollywood want to take that risk. Risk is also owned by Hasbro. So the shade of this dress is very much the brown of Old Kent Road. Boy, did I love the Monopoly game, starting off with the cheap brown properties, Old Kent Road and Whitechapel. Now these were unsung heroes in my opinion. They were obviously cheap to purchase, which was great, and the money you got back for them was pretty low as well, but it kept the money kind of coming in every time someone passed go. In my imagination, people landed on these properties more than any of the others. My brother's strategy was the opposite. He'd buy up the expensive Park Lane and Mayfair properties, and you'd obviously get completely stung if hotels ended up on those. So high risk, high return, completely different strategy. So I didn't know this, but Monopoly being like the most capitalist game of all time actually started off being a really anti-capitalist game. So it was invented by a woman called Elizabeth Magie, or Magie, I'm not really sure how to pronounce her name, but we'll say Maggie for now. And she sounds like a really interesting person actually, kind of anti-establishment. And she was a game designer and a feminist, but also a bit of an economic nerd. She didn't get married until she was 44, which was unusual for ladies of the time, and we're talking like 1903, so very much the turn of the century. And she patented the game, calling it originally the landlord's game, which was meant to show how evil land monopolies were at the time. It was a critique of the big monopolizers of the time. So Rockefeller, for example, the Rockefeller Empire. In the original game, you could play one of two ways. So you could, there were two sets of rules actually. So you had the monopolist rules, where the idea was that one winner would crush everyone else, and that's like the capitalist model, I guess. And then you've got the prosperity set, where the wealth was shared and distributed amongst all of the players. I remember the pieces really fondly. I always kind of liked being the car or the dog. But where did the pieces come from? So back when the game first came about, the pieces were like chess pieces. So like chess pawns were used. And this was early 1900s. Wooden pawns were introduced, so kind of like a car, iron, lantern, rocking horse. 1937, the pieces turned to metal. This is where the purse, the dog, and the battleship were added. And actually in 1942, owing to shortages of metal due to the war, the game returned to wooden pieces for a while. And then when the metal reserves had stacked back up, it returned to metal. The randomness of the pieces, they're completely random. There's a hat, there's a foot, there's a horse, you know, there's a ship, there's an iron. I mean, it's weird. So the truth is that any old eclectic piece was really used from the game's inception. So it was always, you know, like Quakers and left-wing intellectuals and academics playing this game in around 1910. So they're sitting around the table, they're just picking up random bits that they can play the game with. So we're talking bracelet trinkets, crackerjack treats. The Parker brothers eventually picked it up and replaced the random pieces with metal tokens that we know today. But yeah, these kind of pieces were like iconic symbols of the time, and as good as any random symbol that could be used. So yeah, as I mentioned, in around the 1910s, a fair few people were playing the game. It was popular amongst academics and Quakers, strangely enough. Quakers, as I recall, have a fairly strong culture of equality and community. So it's no wonder that the game hit it off with them having this obviously quite anti-capitalist bent. And, well, depending on what rulebook you played with, obviously the one where the second set of rules where the wealth is shared was supposed to demonstrate how much better that model is than the bloodthirsty capitalist model that you could play alternatively. So yeah, it was supposed to demonstrate that moral superiority, and it's no wonder that the game kicked off with a community that espouse equality as one of their main values, etc., etc. But Monopoly being a game, obviously the version where, you know, there was a clear winner really caught on as the better game, you know. Capitalism is a societal model that works. I think it serves a purpose, in my opinion. It somewhat echoes the relative competition of societal nature in this game that we call life. So let's say tentatively that the more money you have, the more you can have. But obviously this really doesn't work when you look at the end game for human existence, which is ostensibly to keep the human race alive, even in the advent of the AI overlord. And in this sense, it's somewhat counterproductive as, well, let's face it, most people aren't stinking rich. And generally speaking, health and wealth go hand in hand. And probably the more wealth you have in general, the chances are you'll have better access to healthcare. So a flawed model, a deeply flawed model, but a useful one when all is said and done. Somewhat necessary in its own way. Actually, I was reading quite an interesting comment from, I believe it was Noam Chomsky, but I might need to double check that. He's a very well-known linguistic philosopher and general philosopher. Either way, he said that the office environment is kind of like comparable to a totalitarian regime, in the sense that your presence there kind of requires a complete subservience to the masters and the powerful forces at play, i.e. the management and the health of the company. If you want to have a break from your desk, it needs to be at a certain time. You cannot leave your desk. You're legally contracted to stay there for 8 hours a day. If you want to have time off, you need to request it well in advance, and only when you're given permission you can. And what he says it comes down to is effectively be stuck in this totalitarian regime or starve, or your children will starve. You have to be there. There's no other option. I just thought that was a really interesting take. And actually, sometimes when you're at your desk at work and you think, oh, I wouldn't mind taking Friday off, but you might not be able to because of work obligations, it does make you start to think, hang on a minute, whose life is this? Is it mine, or does my life belong to somebody else? Yeah, it got me thinking, and just interesting in the context of thinking about the Monopoly game and the capitalist model at large. You know, what are the options? Can we think that far? Is it coming? Potentially with the advent of robots being able to do our jobs, where does that leave us? Where does that leave humans? I don't know, but I'm here to watch the fireworks. I'm front middle. With popcorn. Yes, sorry for that tangent. In the 1930s, so a guy called Charles Darrow claimed the game as his own. He tarted up the whole project. And Darrow made millions from the game. And Magie, Elizabeth Magie, its original creator, apparently was only ever paid $500. Darrow had negotiated this massive contract where he received royalties. And yes, Elizabeth Magie only received $500. Apparently she lashed out in 1936, showing paparazzi her original board game and saying, look, you know, I created this, you know, what the F is going on? To no avail. She died in 1948 in relative obscurity. Nothing was mentioned on her gravestone or in her obituary about her having created the game. So talk about capitalism biting you in the arse. There's no messing with that monster at the moment, it seems, although the robots might have their way. So Charles Darrow, the guy who profited, his version gave us Rich Uncle Pennybags. And this guy, it's the guy on the Monopoly board who wore the monocle, or did he? Now come on, how many of you remember him wearing a monocle? I do. I distinctly remember him having a monocle, but apparently he didn't. And this is obviously known as the Mandela effect, where people misremember stuff that happened, that actually happened. It's a type of false memory where many different people incorrectly remember the same thing incorrectly. Like, for example, the widespread rumour that Nelson Mandela died in the mid-80s in prison, which is random. And that's why it's called the Mandela effect. You know, people actually genuinely believe that Nelson Mandela died in prison in the 1980s, and actually thinking about it and hearing that he actually died in 2013. I remember thinking that he died before he died, but he hadn't died. No, but people have really strong mismemories of the event. So, and they remember it happening. So people, remember news reports, people remember speeches, people even remember the presence of Mandela's widow at his funeral. All this points towards the sim that we're obviously living in and its obvious existence. This is weird. Another example is people remembering that Pikachu had black tips on his tail. He didn't. His tail was completely yellow. So now everyone's like, the Mandela effect. Oh, it's just the Mandela effect. It's no biggie. But actually, it really is, in my opinion. Like, it really is. Who remembers that? And why does everyone remember that? It's a big deal, like plastic in the ocean and the potentially uncontrollable development of artificial intelligence. It's a big deal that people are reportedly and repeatedly misremembering things. Lots of people, and we're ignoring that. What do you think? It feels like a conspiracy to me. Talking of games set in the 1900s, I'm going to be reviewing a game that is not yet published, but it is coming up very soon, and it's called Prohibition Wars, and it's going to be pretty fabulous by the looks of things. It's a board game and it should be worth a punt. Boop boopy doo, boop boopy doo. Some fun facts. There is a gold-plated Monopoly set worth $2 million. During World War II, British intelligence hid compasses and maps in Monopoly sets in order to help prisoners of war escape. You can get lots of themed Monopoly sets, everything from SpongeBob to Star Wars to cheese. So, the next time you land on Park Lane with a hotel and you're thinking of just flipping the board over and dashing all of your brother's money in the air, just remember the game was originally about economic fairness, hijacked by capitalism. Hope you enjoyed. Don't forget to subscribe. Mwah, mwah, mwah.